Hi, my name's Briony from Bee and Blossom. Today I wanted to talk to you about rectus diastasis or abdominal muscle separation that occurs as part of pregnancy and then that women need to address in their postnatal recovery. Now that we have moved for a temporary period to predominantly telehealth or online consults and classes, I'd like to just step ladies through how to look at an abdominal wall, so how you can look at something yourself. Some of the things that we are particularly looking at during that assessment time and how we would put into place some exercises perhaps to help with the rehabilitation of your abdominal wall. So I hope you find this helpful. So when we talk about a condition called rectus diastasis, we need to think about the anatomy of the abdominal wall. So the abdominals are in layers. So the muscles that run up and down the center here are the rectus abdominal muscles. Then you have your external obliques running down on an angle, internal obliques, and then a deep layer called your transverse abdominal muscle. Now, down the center area is a fibrous tissue called your linea alba, and it runs from the bottom of your sternum all the way down to the top of your pubic bone. And that white connective tissue band joins or communicates the two sides of your abdominal walls. So as you go through a pregnancy, the abdominal muscles get to a point where there's so much stretch on them that that connective tissue band down the middle starts to spread or widen. Now the tissue's makeup is designed to allow it to accommodate to that stretch, so it will naturally give down the middle. And studies have shown that up to 100% of women get a certain amount of separation of the rectus muscles down the front here. So it is a normal thing that's going to go on in pregnancy. But just like lots of other conditions in pregnancy, we are affected uniquely by what's going on in our bodies. So some women will have a significant amount of separation, stretch and thinning out of that tissue, while other women may not have as much happening and rebound really quite easily after they've had their baby. They have done some research looking at what some of the risk factors are, and interestingly, women's weight beforehand, the actual circumferential measure around their tummy and the degree of mobility that they have don't seem to be related to whether they are more or less likely to get abdominal muscle separation. During pregnancy, there are a couple of suggestions that we do make to try and limit how much load or additional load is placed on that connective tissue down the front wall. One of those things is to try and make sure that when you're getting up from out of bed, that instead of just sitting up and springing up and putting all the load into the central area here, that you roll through your side and push up through your arms so that you're less likely to constantly push into that weakened midpoint. When you're getting out of a chair, instead of, if you're sitting back in a chair or lounge, instead of just pulling up using your tummy muscles, we tell ladies, get your arms back and push through your arms to bring your body forward before you then go to stand. There is also a suggestion that we could put some external support on, so some sort of belt or elasticized banding that can create a little bit of gentle inward pressure or support for that abdominal wall. And I think that particularly that is a really great idea for women that have had pregnancies close together or that sustained quite a big separation with your first pregnancy. Or perhaps this is your third or fourth baby and the abdominal wall itself is really quite thinned. So you're much more aware of that weight of the pregnancy down the midline from earlier on in it as well. I would also suggest that you really think about how you're standing regularly in your pregnancy and just check in. Are you someone that stands with their belly popped forward, pressed into their hips and their shoulders back? Because that will tend to put a lot of load on that connective tissue as well. So just check into your posture quite regularly through a pregnancy and see if you can bring your rib cage down and up over the top of your tummy so that you're less likely to place the same sort of strain on that front tummy wall. So when we assess the abdominal wall, there's a few areas that we're looking for. One of them is the interecti distance. So how far apart are those muscle bellies that run directly down the center of your tummy? So we'll have a look at that down on the floor through a small curl up or chest lift maneuver. We also want to look at what is the quality of that linea alba, the connective tissue that's running down, joining the two sides of your abdominal walls together. There's been some recent research in the last couple of years by a couple of physiotherapists who are very well known and respected in the world of research, and that's Diane Lee and Paul Hodges. And we know now that recovery of these abdominal wall muscles, or this abdominal wall separation, also depends on how distorted the connective tissue is that's running down the central area here. So when you're doing a little chest lift and we're looking at the distance your abdominal muscles are apart, we are also looking at the quality of the connective tissue that runs between them. It's been my experience that women that have quite a large separation, 4 or 5 finger widths apart, but have quite a springy end feel when we feel that abdominal gap, often recover better, say, than a lady that maybe only has a 2-finger separation. But when we place our fingers and have a feel, sometimes those fingers can really slide quite deep into their abdomen, so that connective tissue is really distorted and takes quite a long time to build up the tension to allow that abdominal wall to function well. So please don't always fixate on how far apart muscles are. I think it's really important to know what kind of quality tissue is in between the two. The other couple of areas that we look at is what's going on with your rib cage position and your breathing. So in people that have adopted a flared up rib cage, and that might be that their back is tight and they're just using their oblique muscles to flare and pop open their internal obliques, then when you're trying to start to do abdominal work, you will often find these ladies will take a big breath in and open their rib cage up and try and do their abs with their rib cage pulled wide like this. And that's just not a functional way to work that abdominal wall. So we need to look at whether that's a strategy that you're using. Another strategy that someone might be using is to grip down with their external oblique muscles. And when people grip down like this, what that gripping down does is it tends to pop the lower part of the tummy open, and again put pressure on the connective tissue or on that weakened abdominal muscle wall separation, and also can drive quite a lot of pressure down into the pelvic floor. So we need to look at how are you positioning your rib cage, how mobile is your rib cage, and what are you doing with your breathing. The last thing we look at then is what impact does setting of your pelvic floor and your deep abdominals, the transverse abdominal wall, how good are you at being able to bring that on to partly correct or fully correct that laxity that exists in the connective tissue that runs down the center of your tummy. So there are lots of things that we are putting into place to try and work out when it is appropriate to give an exercise and how quickly we can progress exercises on. And this is why it's important to say, hey, there is not an absolute recipe that people must follow in rehabilitating their abdominal wall. We need to do that on an individual basis, and what exercise isn't appropriate for some women is an appropriate exercise for someone else. So I'm just going to show you now how you can assess for the gap and also the laxity down the middle. So you have a lie down on your back. Leave your legs in a comfortable bent position. And then you need to take one hand to support behind your head, and the other hand you're going to bring your hand up, placing your fingers down with your palm looking up towards you. We're going to start at a point about 3 centimeters above your belly button. You're going to do a slow lift of your head and shoulders, bringing your rib cage towards your pelvis, and you will feel for the sides of the muscle bellies here. So take a breath in, then breathe out, come up, pulling your ribs to your hips. This is far enough, so you should just feel the bottom of the shoulder blades in contact, and you're just pressing down. Move the fingers slightly sideways and feel for the border of those muscles here. Slowly come down, relax. Think about it. Now, an average distance postnatally when we're measuring in the first few days is usually 1 to 2 fingers. We normally say anything more than about 2.5 fingers is classified as a diastasis. Then you move your fingers down and have another check around belly button height. So breathe in
As you breathe out, slowly bring your ribs towards your hips and have a feel for where that gap is here. And down. And then again at a point about 3 centimeters below. Breathe in, breathe out, come up, and have a feel for that gap. Okay, so once you've worked out what sort of separation there is between your muscle bellies, I want you to repeat it, and this time pay more attention to what's the feel of that connective tissue. How deep do your fingers sink into your tummy? And you're looking for a nice spongy, a kind of end feel, a bit like if you think about this sort of gap or this web space between your thumb and your index finger. When it's pulled quite firm, your fingers touch it, you get a nice springy end feel. So that's what you want to feel as you're coming up. You don't want your fingers to be able to sink sort of too deep inside. So we put the fingers back up about 3 centimeters above. Exhale, come up and just check. Do you get that nice springy feel? Or do you feel like your fingers want to continue to sink right down into your tummy and it feels quite boggy to touch? Come down again and feel that at each of the points. And then last one, exhale, come up and have a feel. Now, most people will find that the point that is the widest or weakest is often around that belly button area. But remember that the separation can go anywhere from right up under the sternum all the way down towards that pubic bone, all the way at the bottom now. So then I would like you to look at how well or what change is made to that connective tissue feel and where the muscle bellies sit when you draw up your pelvic floor and when you attempt to draw on that deep abdominal wall muscle, the transverse abdominal muscle. Now, in some instances, you'll actually find that when you do bring that abdominal muscle on and you come up into a chest lift, you may find that your muscle bellies either stay exactly where they are or occasionally that gap will widen. But what you're really looking for in the early stage of rehabilitating is to try and just build that springy feel up to the connective tissue that's running down the center here. So I would get you to, you're going to start with just breathing into your tummy. And then as you breathe out, you're going to lift up around the openings between the legs like you're controlling wind. And across this tummy area here, you're just going to try and think about sliding the sides of the abdomen in towards your belly button and then come up. So fingers back in again, take a breath in. As you breathe out, lift up around the openings between the legs, set across this lower tummy and then add the lift. And see, does that change how springy and how shallow you are when you get to the end feel with those fingers? Come down, relax, take a breath in. As you breathe out, lift up your pelvic floor. Think about drawing the sides of the abdomen in towards that belly button and up you come. And check, can you get a nice springy short end feel, or do your fingers continue to feel like they're sliding in deep? And then final point, set, continue to breathe out, come up and feel for that gap. So women that tend to find it takes a little bit longer in their rehabilitation of their abdominal wall are often ladies that really can't quite yet get a nice tense feel through their linea alba. And what we want to do is to gently, in the rehabilitation phase, we need to load that connective tissue, because it's by loading those fibers that band here will lay down more fibers in the direction or the line of force. So we're wanting them to go transversely across here to create more support. But we also need to be mindful that we only load enough where we can control that pressure so that we don't get bulging up in a dome-like shape or a mohawk, if you like, down the center of your tummy, or a dropping in and involuting of that tummy down that midline. So we want to be able to maintain a nice flat look across the abdomen as we're loading that connective tissue.
So I hope that you have found today's video interesting and that it's taught you a little bit more about what we're looking for when we're assessing people's abdominal muscle wall after they've had their baby. And we will tend to see in most people that, say, 80% of people, by the time they're back to see us at that 6 to 8 week mark, their rectus abdominis or their rectus diastasis has self-resolved. But there are some tummy walls that need a bit of additional help, and so often when the physio sees you on the ward, we will kind of give people an idea on whether we suggest that they maybe go and have some extra assistance in helping to resolve that diastasis. There are a few ladies who, regardless of the work that they put into it, just can't build that tension up through that connective tissue. But this takes a long time, and if it still doesn't happen, then they are the ladies that seek surgical intervention. But it is really very, very few ladies that end up needing to have any kind of surgical intervention for their abdominal wall postnatally. And so as long as you stick to your program and get working hard on that abdominal rehabilitation, then things should settle and improve over time.